I'm a mom of 9-year-old triplets, and I work full-time. I thought having triplets and working full-time was a lot, and now I've had to add trying to figure out my life being totally upended and exploded. I'm Megan Lorick. My parents bought the property in Malibu in 1966 for their 6 kids and themselves. So this is the family home. It was a great place to grow up, and I was looking forward to having my kids grow up here. When I grew up, it was a neighborhood filled with kids. The builder's daughter lived across the way. They had 5 kids. The people down the street had 5 kids. This was like in the 60s and the 70s. And then, a few years ago, all these young families came back, and it was a great place. You could run around, and you were told, come home when the lights come on. There's a lot of hurdles, especially in the city of Malibu. Even before the fires, it was difficult to build in Malibu. And I remember in the 93 fires when, it came close, the house didn't burn down. And my dad, who's the World War II veteran, he was not a man of much emotion, but he cried knowing that the house didn't burn. And I realize now the enormity of why he was crying, because he knew how difficult it was going to be to rebuild. My dad loved this house, loved the property, and he used to see when he looked out at that view that it would remind him of when he was stationed in Hawaii during World War II. So there's a strong sense of not obligation, but like just fondness and, sentimentality. The city of Malibu had hired a consultant to discuss what they did right and what they did wrong during the emergency. And what I had to tell them was that the day of the fire, I called the city of Malibu and I said, I'm getting an alert on my watch duty. It says that we're in an evacuation zone or a warning. And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. They're not going to let it get past Topanga because it's a natural fire break. And then around 1:30, I get another alert and I call the city back and they said, no, there's nothing to worry about. And I'm like, well, okay. And I can see the smoke. I said to my husband, they're going to turn the power off. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get a hotel room. I only booked it for 2 days because I figured the power would come back on. Like, no big deal. My husband called me around 8 o'clock at night and he said to me, you've got to call 911. The house is burned down and my car's on fire. He's like, I can't breathe. So I call 911 and they say, sorry, there's nothing we can do. We're not going up there to get him. And I said, what do you mean? He's going to die. I know exactly where he is. He's at the first hairpin turn. He's not that far up. He says there's no more flames. But there's so much smoke that he cannot breathe because he had to walk down the hill because his car caught on fire. Said, nope, he needs to figure out what to do. I said to him, Nick, do you want to say goodbye to the kids? Because I don't know what to do at this point. They're not coming. Luckily, my friend Marnie, they live in Malibu, and Marnie was able to get a hold of their friend Matt, who was still in the area, and Matt begged them to come and said, look, he's a father of 3, he's trapped up there, you gotta come help him. Finally, a sheriff's deputy came up and got him. After the fires, my husband was in the hospital, he was recovering. I wasn't even processing the whole thing because there was so much that had to be done. All these applications had to be filed, like the SBA loan, the FEMA, like all the stuff. There's just so much stuff that had to be done. It was like a fire hose of information that was just being shoved at you. This is eastern Malibu that burned. Western Malibu burned during the Woolsey fire. So there's this whole eastern side of Malibu that, really has coalesced and come together. The Kids, Boys and Girls Club has been amazing. I've seen neighbors and people that I grew up with that I hadn't seen in years. I think that Malibu's a unique situation in that there is that small town community. You see people in town. It's nice to know that there are people in your same situation, because you don't want to feel like you're an island, like you're the only one that's dealing with this mess. We will get through it. We just got to figure out how to get through it. Most of us are planning on rebuilding. We're trying to make our houses as safe as possible. But I've said this time and time again, if there are no resources from the state and local government to manage the lands, to make sure the reservoirs are full, make sure that we have enough fire engines that are working, and making sure we have the firefighting planes, we can make our houses as fire safe as possible, but it'll happen again unless the government is held accountable. Hopefully most people will come back, but I don't know. Because it's like at a certain point, you just get worn down and you're tired.
The cleanup effort after the fires is on schedule to be the fastest in modern history. At the end of July, the Army Corps of Engineers had already cleared more than 9,000 lots from the burn area. But there's still a lot of questions about the process and what toxins remain in the soil that was left behind. From LA Times Studios, this is Rebuilding LA. I'm Kate Cagle. So right now, the current aerial view of the neighborhoods hit by the Palisades and the Eaton fires in January, you see row after row of mostly tidy, empty lots of earth raked of any sign that a home once stood there. Get this, more than 2.5 million tons of ash, soil, metal, other debris has been scooped up by government workers and taken to local landfills. This is an impressive feat and completed far faster than after other major firestorms. Still, residents are not entirely happy. The process was confusing, and we are learning there have been a lot of complaints. And it's unclear if the remaining soil is safe or if toxins still linger in the dirt or the plants or buildings left standing. Here's Kelsey Zemet, an Altadena resident we heard from in our very first episode.
The condition of our house is considered heavy lead in terms of the findings from our industrial hygienist. We paid out of pocket to have the house tested, and as you can see behind me, the houses are not standing, so there was really nothing to protect smoke and ash coming into our house, and there's a lot of it.
Fires that burn through neighborhoods release a complex mix of chemicals into the air, like arsenic, chromium, mercury, and lead. But FEMA has refused to test the soil, forcing many residents to do their own testing before they consider how or whether to rebuild their homes. Others have stepped in to help. LA County tested the soil for free, as did researchers from places like USC. Even our colleagues at the Los Angeles Times suited up in hazmat gear to investigate. Here they are in the field back in March.
We have our crack team of from the Environment, Science, and Health team at the LA Times. Myself, Tony Briscoe, I cover air quality. Noah Haggerty, who is our science, health, and environment reporter. We're all out here to do soil testing today just to ensure that all of these properties have been cleaned up to California standards, which the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA is not doing.
So where do we go from here? To help us figure this out, we've got Tony Briscoe in studio with us. He's an environmental reporter with the LA Times. We're also joined by Noah Haggerty, who covers environment, health, and science for the paper. Both were part of the team that tested the soil. Thank you guys both for being here. We saw these images of you suited up in the hazmat suits. What made you want to go out and actually test the soil yourselves?
Yeah, so we first reported in February, and it really wasn't publicly announced, that FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, who's leading the wildfire recovery efforts, were not going to be doing comprehensive soil testing after cleanup efforts, which was
unlike previous disasters.
It was a really big deal that they weren't doing this after every major wildfire since 2007 in California. We've had post-cleanup soil testing to ensure, essentially, that wildfire survivors are going back to a clean property so that there's not excessive levels of lead, of arsenic, of really nasty substances that can cause really devastating health effects afterward.
Did they ever explain why?
Well, their official answer to us was a little bit complicated. They said that it would be time-consuming and costly. I would imagine we've heard from other wildfire survivors who say that it's worth it because, people interact outside in ways where we're coming in contact with the soil every day. Whether you're gardening, we breathe a lot of this in because we live in an arid climate where dust is kicked up very often because we don't get a lot of rain. And I think it left a lot of people feeling unsure and unsafe. But even 1 year prior, with the Maui wildfires, they had done soil testing. And so I think it raised a question in a lot of people's mind. Why was it okay to do in Hawaii and not in California?
So you guys, being intrepid reporters, said, well, I guess it's time to suit up and do it ourselves. What can you tell us about the actual process you had to go through?
We started cold calling anyone that lived in the Palisades and in Altadena. We called folks with standing homes and folks whose homes had been destroyed. And we asked them if we could just go and test their soil. And then in March, over 3 days, we went out into the field, us and then some of our colleagues, and tested 40 samples from properties. In each burn area, we tested 10 standing homes and 10 homes that had been destroyed and cleaned up by the Army Corps. And then we compared those to the state's cleanup goals that they used in previous fires. And so those are goals that are mostly based on the potential adverse health effects. So what level do we have to clean the soil up to ensure that people are safe when they return home?
So what did you guys find?
We found in Altadena, 3 out of the 10 standing homes had contamination that included arsenic, lead, and mercury. And out of the homes in Altadena that were cleaned up by the Army Corps, 2 were contaminated. 1 had lead above that cleanup level, and 1 had elevated levels of arsenic. However, in the Palisades, we only found 1 level above the typical cleanup goals, and that was a standing home.
So what was the reaction from, first, the homeowners to these numbers?
It was really tough news to deliver. No one wants to know that their property contains dangerous toxic substances above what the state deems an acceptable level, let alone some of the homeowners, or at least the one homeowner who had excessive levels of lead. She had, grandchildren, great-grandchildren who would often visit her property for holidays. And so not understanding whether or not it was safe to bring them there after the fire. Her home had survived, but her garage had burned down, and she was unsure whether or not she'd have the necessary insurance payout to rebuild. And so it was just this kind of plat of land that we had found was contaminated and would continue to sit like that until she could come up with the money to at least pave it over. But a lot of other folks just had no idea, and I'm imagining that there are thousands of homeowners with no idea, and this absence of information is what's causing so much uncertainty.
I'm curious, Tony, because I saw you at a press conference back in the spring pressing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA about this policy. Did they ever respond to your reporting that found that contaminants were left behind?
Yeah, that was the first time at that press conference that they had publicly said that they were not going to be conducting soil testing. We were the first to report that, and then our follow-up soil testing was the first evidence that they were leaving contamination behind even after they cleaned properties up. And so that put them into a very uncomfortable position. I think that they've tried to reassure folks that they're doing all they can and that they continue to maintain that their cleanup is sufficient enough to remove contamination. But they kind of backtracked a little bit in saying that their most immediate, priority is to remove ash, debris, and turn it back over to the homeowner. It's not on them necessarily to ensure that it's safe for rebuilding. That's on the homeowner.
Well, I'm very interested to talking to you more about that later in the episode, the actual debris removal process, which we've heard so many elected officials tout as being, the fastest in history. Mm-hmm. But there's some layers to that we need to get into. But first, Noah, I know you specifically looked at schools and schools that had reopened already. What did you find?
Yeah, we looked at the Pasadena Unified School District, which reopened pretty quickly after the fire. And they eventually agreed, after parents had pushed them, to do soil testing on the schools that they had reopened. So that wasn't including any of their properties that had actually been damaged in the fire itself. And they released maps for all the schools. And so we went through and we looked at the maps and counted the exceedances above these state cleanup goals. And we found that 11 out of their 23 schools had levels that were above those cleanup goals. 40% of them...
11 out of 23.
11 out of 23. So that's almost half. 40% of them had lead above the levels and 20% had arsenic above those levels.
Was that surprising to you?
Unfortunately, no, because we had done the soil testing and we had gotten more data from the county, who did their own soil testing, not only in the burn zone, but also downwind, that was finding that there was considerable contamination at properties. And so this was kind of par for the course.
And Tony, you were telling me earlier that some of that in Altadena is because of the way the wind blew the smoke, right?
In the early days, as the fires were still burning, you could see this huge smoke plume. I mean, even, I live close to downtown, and you go outside, and they almost look like thunderstorm clouds blowing over the area. And it blew from Altadena through downtown L.A., all the way through Long Beach and San Pedro. And so presumably it, was falling on all the communities downwind. And it left an incredibly long smoke trail. The county did testing up to a mile downwind and found that lead levels in many cases were worse than inside the burn area.
Wow, it totally changes the way you think about your exposure to these fires. Even if you weren't in an evacuation zone, it doesn't mean that you necessarily escape the impact.
Yeah, and so folks that have properties that burn down, they are going through this Army Corps remediation process, which in previous fires would at least ensure that the soil was safe. But folks with standing homes, so people that are not in the burn area, there's no real support for them to go through a remediation process, and that burden is left on them. And a lot of times they have much more difficult fights with their insurance because it's not as easy for them to just prove that their home is contaminated.
So those 11 schools that tested positive for elevated lead levels, are they doing remediation? What's happening there?
So Pasadena Unified School District said that they would immediately close the areas where they found contamination. They did detailed sampling, so they might have done like the baseball field near the tennis courts where people eat lunch. And they said anywhere that there was a sample that had elevated levels, they're going to close that off. And then they said this summer they're going to go through a remediation process, which will likely include either removing soil and putting new soil or just putting new soil on top of it.
And then is there follow-up testing?
Pasadena Unified School District said that they would also do additional testing to investigate the areas that initially tested for high levels of contamination.
I feel like we should also tell folks, why is lead bad? Why are some of these chemical exposures, what's the risk factor there?
I mean, many of these toxic metals that we're talking about that were left by the fire have no safe level of exposure. And so when we're talking about exposures, you're talking about anything that you're inhaling with dust and incidentally ingesting. A lot of children who play outdoors, play in dirt, unfortunately, and there's a lot of hand-to-mouth activity that can put them in touch with that. Gardeners also, obviously, a lot of contact with this soil. And from these old homes that were burning down, We know that there's a lot of really hazardous materials, lead-based paint, just decades and decades of that. Arsenic-coated wood, which is no longer used, which was used as a treatment there. And so pretty much anything in these houses are burning down, that was released, all of these tons of ash that need to be cleaned up. And then we saw rains washing over the area too, and that drives it into even more places. So the question was, where is all of it ending up, and is it all being cleaned appropriately?
And arsenic is a known carcinogen for humans. And lead, especially when young kids are exposed, can lead to developmental challenges and intellectual challenges.
So all this leads you, Noah, to actually getting your blood tested.
Yeah. I was not only covering this, but experiencing it firsthand. Those first 3 days of the Palisades fire, I was on the ground talking with folks and didn't do the best job in the world wearing a mask and everything because I was very much in survival mode like a lot of the people around me. Most people those days were worried about if their family was safe, where their friends were. And so I remember seeing this report after the fires that from some researchers from Harvard that found that firefighters who had fought the fire, their blood levels were 5 times those as firefighters that fought typical wildland fires. And so that got me kind of thinking, they were 10 feet from the fire. I was 100 feet. What was my exposure? And the county had this free lead blood testing program that they're still doing. So anyone that is worried about their exposure can get it tested. And so I went and got my blood tested for lead.
And what'd you find out?
I do not have elevated levels of lead in my blood. And I asked the
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean...
I asked the county for the numbers of everyone that participated in this program, and luckily, most people are getting the same results that I have. There's been over 1,700 people that have gotten tested. So far, only 0.5% have elevated levels of lead. And even in those cases, it's older people over the age of 40 who are less likely to experience the negative health effects.
But I have to think that as you're talking to residents, this is playing into their long-term plans of, do they want to come back? What are folks telling you?
It's hard to feel confident in your decision. I mean, this is a very complicated issue, and we're talking about soil, but there's contamination, within people's homes. There's air quality considerations. There's drinking water considerations and concerns. And there's some testing that's going on, but there's not a lot of comprehensive efforts from the government to do testing, and so it's very piece by piece. And a lot of people are just left very disoriented, trying to make sense of what their own health risks would even be to move back.
And I would just say, piggybacking off of that even if your property is cleaned appropriately and you're removing all of the lead and arsenic and other chemicals from your property, these are thousands of properties. So you're hoping that your neighbor cleans theirs so that dust or rain or wind or rain doesn't carry it back onto your property. But we really just don't know that because there's no comprehensive testing going on and people are working without that data from day to day.
What about some of the nonprofits who stepped in, like universities? Also, LA County Public Health is doing some testing, but I hear you saying that's still not comprehensive.
Sure. I mean, there has been a lot of free testing that has been offered, which is a really good thing. USC has done lead testing, but that's specifically focused on one contaminant. LA County Department of Public Health has probably had the most comprehensive so far, and they found, I think, more than a quarter of properties that had been cleaned by the Army Corps of Engineers still had elevated lead. And a few others had high levels of arsenic as well. So we're seeing, many properties are still contaminated that were presumably clean. And then there's many other properties that still have yet to be tested.
And there was a fight over this. Governor Gavin Newsom was pushing FEMA to do the testing, this comprehensive testing. There's also been a push for the state to do it and then pay for it. So where does all that stand now?
It's been really interesting to track from start to finish. At first, the governor's office was up in arms over the lack of soil testing, his office didn't appear to realize that this was not something that the federal government was going to offer this time. And the California Office of Emergency Services Director wrote to FEMA saying that this needs to happen for worker safety, understanding that there's going to be a lot of construction workers who are going to be rebuilding and hopefully wearing masks, but we're not seeing that every time in these areas, but also for the wildfire survivors to give them this peace of mind. And you can look at in the same way that we did with past fires, and we know that a considerable amount of properties are still going to be contaminated after that initial cleanup, which is why testing was done in the first place. Anywhere from 15 to 30% of properties after the initial cleanup are still going to be testing high for some of these toxic metals. And so in those cases, the government would go back and remove another layer of soil until it was clean. And so it was a really big deal that we don't have these cleanup levels at all in this cleanup. But since then, FEMA has doubled, tripled down and saying, we're not going to do this soil testing. We encourage, the state or local government to pay for that. And it's kind of been crickets ever since. The Newsom administration is now kind of downplaying these concerns, saying that the soil testing is showing the effectiveness of the cleanup, which, as we mentioned, there are plenty of properties that have tested positive for these contaminants and presumably pose a health risk. So that doesn't really square with where the messaging was initially.
All right. Well, I want to dig into more of that, of what's left behind, also how the cleanup was done, how quickly it was done, and what you're finding about how maybe incompletely it was done for at least some homeowners. But first, let's take a quick break.
The Palisades fire was called that because it broke out in the Palisades, but it impacted so much more. And all the way down through Malibu, they've all been impacted in different ways. And that's why coming together at scale to help in the rebuild process is going to be so critical. It is absolutely devastating to hear the number of stories, the magnitude of impact that people have felt as a result of this fire, the emotional and mental toll that it takes.
Los Angeles County Supervisor Lindsay Horvath has spent much of the past 7 months helping the areas of her district that were devastated by the January wildfires. She has met with residents, coordinated public and private resources, and helped to open schools and businesses.
We saw people who lost their homes still showing up to volunteer for other people who lost their homes. And that spirit of togetherness, it's what's given us hope that we will be able to come back together as a community.
Supervisor Horvath met recently in the Palisades with Rebuild SoCal Partnership to talk about how she
During one of the most severe windstorms Southern California experienced in more than a decade, the Palisades and Eaton fires ignited, leaving heartbreaking losses in our communities. Now, as we build back, we're building stronger, cleaner, and more resilient. In communities most vulnerable to dangerous weather conditions and wildfires, Southern California Edison is placing power lines underground, hardening the electric system by installing wires with protective coating, and adding advanced technology to help keep communities safe. So when Southern California faces the next storm, the next most severe event,
Copy helicopters, structures adjacent here to Pioneer Road.
we'll be ready. Learn more at sce.com/disaster recovery.
When a wildfire takes so much, it's hard to know where to start. But in neighborhoods across Los Angeles, something powerful is taking shape. People are rebuilding, not just homes, but strength, stability, and a deeper sense of community. Based in Southern California, Axos Bank believes in that kind of resilience and proudly stands with regional communities. Axos's construction mortgage program is here to support those ready to rebuild, on their terms, on their timeline. Because starting over isn't easy, but with the right support, it can lead to something even stronger. With one-time closed loans, interest-only payments during construction, and financing for everything from full rebuilds to major renovations, Axos offers fast, flexible options built to match the home and future you're envisioning. A safer home, a stronger community, a future rebuilt together. If you're ready to take that first step, visit Axos Bank at axosbank.com/rebuild. That's axosbank.com/rebuild. Loan approval is subject to credit approval and program guidelines. Not all loan programs are available in all states for all loan amounts. Interest rate and program terms are subject to change without notice. Mortgage, home equity, and credit products are offered through Axos Bank. Deposit products are offered through Axos Bank. Axos Bank is an equal housing lender. Member FDIC. Axos Bank, NMLS number 524995.
We are back with Rebuilding LA. I'm Kate Cagle. Okay, so Tony, we have heard every elected official tout that this is the fastest cleanup in modern disaster history. And they have cleared a lot of lots, but you're reporting that a lot of homeowners still aren't happy. So let's start with kind of the headline, which is that this whole process, it turns out it was confusing, not just to homeowners, but to some people behind the scenes, what was included and what wasn't.
So we've requested a lot of public records about people who were calling in with either questions or concerns about the cleanup. And from March to mid-May, really, there were hundreds, I believe it was more than 800 complaints that had been called in regarding the federal cleanup. This ranged anywhere from people saying, hey, you guys left some fire debris on my property, anything from car parts to pieces of building foundations, to, hey, you're not following your own rules. You're not taking soil, contaminated soil from where you said you were going to take it. And this is owed to a few different things. People really don't understand it. This is a very complex cleanup. What is eligible to be taken away and what is not. I think a lot of people were upset that more, trees, contaminated pool water, and broken concrete and things like that would be taken away, and they weren't. But also, it's changed along the way. So now the cleanup at this stage is probably accepting a lot more things for removal than it was at the beginning. But that also means that at the beginning of the cleanup, you might not have had as good of a cleanup as we're seeing now. All that to say, homeowners are seeing that there's a lot more work to be done after this, and it puts people really on edge on whether it's being appropriately cleaned up and leaving contamination behind.
Well, and I feel like I saw so many press conferences from the U.S. Army Corps that was like, we got this, don't worry, we're going to clean up your property, we'll take the foundation if you want us to. So I understand why some homeowners might be confused now that it wasn't all done.
Yeah, it's really been something that's been a struggle. It's been a full-time job for a lot of these homeowners to kind of figure out what was going to be taken care of by the federal government. And again, they've revised their plan at least 6 to 8 times from what we've seen just with records that we've obtained. The question is, how has it changed? We haven't still kind of seen all of that. But even from public records that we've kind of reviewed, their workers don't seem to understand, and there's been confusion out in the field just from personnel who are performing oversight. One of the biggest examples has been contaminated pool water. What do you do with it? I mean, it's laced with soot, ash, and all of these kind of chemicals. You can't just flush it down the storm drain. But in certain instances, we found that they're spraying it onto neighbors' yards, into a property owner's yards, spraying it into the streets with filters and sometimes without the proper filters. So this raises so many different questions about cross-contamination and is this being handled properly? And are people notified in all of these instances of how they're managing this? It certainly is confusing even to me.
So what have you heard from our local elected officials about some of these concerns?
Well, just in speaking with trying to get it from the horse's mouth, the primary contractor is Environmental Chemical Corp. And the Army Corps of Engineers, they say that they're following things to the letter of the law and that they are hiring oversight personnel to make sure that issues like this don't happen and that they're flagging this to fix things if they happen. But time and time again, with all of these different examples that we're finding in these public records about either complaints or problematic things that are being done in this cleanup, we don't know how they're fixing some of these issues. Another common complaint And issue that we saw out there was over-excavating somebody's building footprint, which will mean the homeowner will likely have to spend thousands of dollars bringing clean soil in. We've seen that not only highlighted by people who are complaining and the homeowners, but the Army Corps themselves. And so my question is are the homeowners notified that this is happening, and are they bringing soil in? So far, they say that they are not trucking in clean soil to fix that as an issue.
It's just so fascinating hearing you talk about this because I feel like so many local leaders have used speed as the only metric for this recovery, how quickly they can rebuild these places. But then you find when you go fast, sometimes mistakes are made along the way. And I'm curious, Noah, from your reporting on the toxins left behind and all of this, how is this factoring into folks' decisions on whether or not they're going to come back?
So some folks are happy and eager to move back, and others have a lot of reservations, and it's a very difficult decision to ultimately make. I've spoken with a lot of experts who think about how we think about risk while I was waiting for my blood test results, including some of the folks that have worked closely after 9/11 and the environmental health concerns that come from that.
Right.
And their advice for folks was to find the relevant information that you can about the contamination that might exist at your property or in your home, and then just try to find the simple steps that you can take to reduce your risk. And so for soil contamination, if you can afford it, it means doing a scrape on your yard, removing the top layer of soil, and then putting new soil down. If you can't afford that, then you can just put new soil down. And if you can't even afford that, just focus on reducing your kids' and pets' potential exposure to the soil, taking off your shoes when you go inside, getting filters for the air in your home, and routinely cleaning the floors. So experts have really stressed that there are some simple steps that people can take to dramatically reduce their risk.
We started this conversation saying that with FEMA not doing the testing, it kind of leaves the window open to a lot of distrust that people aren't getting answers from the government about the safety of these communities. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
People want information to be able to move back. They need to know that they're going to be safe when they move back. And so they will go to the means that they need to in order to get that information. And right now, there's a lot of gaps from the government in terms of the data that they're providing. And also the guidance can be conflicting or sometimes murky that just leave people frustrated and not sure who they can trust. There have been some kind of grassroots organizations that have come up to try to fill that void. One good example is Eaton Fire Residents United, and they've been collecting the test results from inside people's homes and posting them online. And so we are seeing some of these groups slowly build a more comprehensive picture. LA County Department of Public Health has also done a pretty good job giving a more comprehensive picture of what the soil looks like. But especially for those first few months, and still in some key areas, there's a lot of missing information. And so people are grasping to whatever they can to make any kind of decision about whether they can move back and what they need to do to move back safely.
Yeah, Tony, how do you think about distrust in these communities?
Yeah, I think a lot of environmental advocates and residents would say that this has really been a failure of all levels of government. I mean, it was FEMA and the federal government that initially said that they would not be doing soil testing, but it was California that accepted a cleanup without it. The LA County Department of Public Health has stepped in to do some testing, and we've received some results, but I've requested from them the exact concentrations and how high these levels are, and they have refused to turn those over. And so I really think it boils down to a lack of transparency and why don't people deserve access to this information that could guard their health, that is protective of their health. And I really don't have the answers as to why they don't want to say more about that. It's really up to journalists and really these activists to keep on asking the questions.
Yeah, I would put this under the umbrella of public safety when people talk about safety. You guys are asking great questions. Noah, you wrote that you're getting some hard questions, including whether or not you would move back knowing everything that you know. How do you answer that?
It's hard because I want to let people make their own decisions. Like, I think that if we have the information and people understand what the potential risks are, that's all we need to move forward. Some people might be comfortable accepting more risk. One of the folks that I talked to who had a contaminated property when we tested soil was glad to have the results and data, and he had high levels of arsenic on his property, but he wasn't too concerned. He had a plan to cover the soil, and he didn't have any young kids, and so that gave him closure to move forward. And so I think it can look very different for different people. If I was moving back, I would definitely want to know what was in my soil. And I would definitely make sure to check in on my neighbors. And if my property didn't have contaminated soil, if my neighbors had gone through the remediation process, if I had a standing home, if I'd gotten the testing for inside my home, I think I'd be willing to slowly move back and still take those extra small steps that we can, taking off your shoes and getting an air purifier. Because I think the reality is, like, contamination in the environment is a part of life. There's no way to avoid it. I mean, we had leaded gasoline until the 70s. And so, there could have been some lead contamination in these areas even before the fires went through. And so we have to accept that that is a risk that's always there, and just try to focus on what can we know and what can we do about it.
Well, and certainly get the air purifier just if you live anywhere near these wildfire communities, hearing about how just the smoke carried so much of it. Do you think that this is going to slow down the rebuilding process at all?
I think in a certain way it is. I know that a lot of people are hesitant to rebuild because they don't know what's in their property. I know that a lot of people are having to hire private contractors to go out and test their lots. And in certain instances, people who are complaining about some of these problems that have been left by federal contractors are saying that this is going to cause issues that, property owners are going to have to fix down the line too.
And there's also kind of a fundamental tension between speed and doing comprehensive environmental cleanups. A lot of these folks are living far from where they work. They might not have enough space for their kids in where they're living, and they're disconnected from their communities. And so there's understandably an urge for people to want to move back quickly. And so there's always going to be this tension between doing it as fast as possible and a comprehensive cleanup that homeowners and the government are going to have to navigate in this fire and future fires.
Noah Haggerty and Tony Briscoe, thank you so much for your time and your expertise on this.
Thanks for having us,
Kate.
That's Noah Haggerty and Tony Briscoe, environment reporters for the LA Times, who were part of a team that tested the soil in Altadena and the Pacific Palisades for lead and other harmful substances. And that's it for Rebuilding LA. If you missed any parts of the series, you can find all of our old episodes anywhere you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. Check us out, leave us a review, and please subscribe. Thank you for listening. Now a word from our sponsors.
The following is a paid message from Rebuild SoCal Partnership. Sponsor has no editorial oversight.
Los Angeles County Supervisor Lindsay Horvath has spent much of the past 7 months helping the areas of her district that were devastated by the January wildfires. She has met with residents, coordinated public and private resources, and helped to open schools and businesses. Horvath recently met in the Palisades with John Switalski of Rebuild SoCal Partnership to talk about what still needs to be done and about how reforming government can accelerate fire recovery.
So the Palisades fire was called that because it broke out in the Palisades, but it impacted so much more. Basically from here, as far as the eye can see, and all the way down through Malibu, they've all been impacted in different ways. And that's why coming together at scale to help in the rebuild process is going to be so critical.
This is just utter devastation. When you first heard that the fires broke out, what came to mind?
I was actually at our Board of Supervisors meeting. We left the meeting and raced over to be on site with community members. We saw how it was spreading and knew that it was going to go beyond the Palisades community. And my heart was in my stomach, and knowing the conditions that had been predicted. And I was worried for the people who had to show up and protect people. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced before in my life.
You must have known many people who have been affected, lost their homes, lost their businesses. What has that been like?
It is absolutely devastating to hear the number of stories, the magnitude of impact that people have felt as a result of this fire. the emotional and mental toll that it takes. I remember when we had our very first town hall meeting, there was a family from Malibu, a mother, a father, and 2 daughters, who came and talked to me afterwards. And their family sort of crystallized for me the range of experience that so many people were feeling and thinking through. And I knew that my team had to show up thinking about all of those things for each and every family that was impacted. We led at the county level in partnership, locally, state and federal, on the debris removal process. And our partners with FEMA and Army Corps of Engineers have been extraordinary. This has been the fastest debris removal process in history. But we know that despite the success of that, until people are home, until people are back in their communities, they have their schools and their places of worship, their grocery stores and all of that, our work is not done.
Since the wildfires, what have you seen take place here in this community?
We saw people who lost their homes still showing up to volunteer for other people who lost their homes. And that spirit of togetherness, I think, is really what got people through that immediate tragic time. It's what's given us hope that we will be able to come back together as a community. And long term, we know that we have to create a recovery and rebuild process that makes sense, that is streamlined, that is affordable, that gets people back into their homes and their neighborhoods as quickly as possible.
We're now here at a cleaned up site. When you see this, what goes through your mind?
I'm just so grateful for the people who have done this work in record speed to give people hope that they can come back into their communities. That means grocery stores and schools. It means places of worship and community centers. And so we can't do that without skilled, trained labor, and we have very important signs of progress at this stage.
There have been many academics that have weighed in to suggest that it's tough to build big projects in California, and really there's too many vetoes along the way, and it almost makes it impossible in many cases.
You know, there's the city, there's the county, there's the state, and all coming with different regulation. So what we have been proposing is creating a rebuilding authority for the entire region. We want to be able to purchase materials at scale to help drive down the cost. We want labor to be at the table because we are setting standards for safety and healthy work environments, but also making sure that we are creating good paying jobs, that we are using the expertise of the industry to inform this rebuild. So we do so quickly, safely, and with all of the experts' best practices in mind.
We see in times of crises that the infrastructure is so interrelated. Roads and evacuation routes, water systems. What have you learned from the lessons of the fire that you would put forward in investing more into infrastructure?
We need to make sure that we're undergrounding utility equipment. We've seen how that has been a contributor to some of the devastation that we have seen. One of the things that I did as chair of the Board of Supervisors is do a countywide look at our water systems infrastructure. And we need to be addressing our water systems and that we're investing in the kind of infrastructure that we need for safe, clean drinking water, for water to fight fires, for everything that we need in our future.
What is it like to bear that burden in a time where your constituents really need you to be many things, a policy leader, but they also just need you to be a human being they can rely on?
So I just try to show up for people in the way that I hope somebody would show up for my family in a time of emergency. But we also have to learn about how can we be building better, what things helped us move quickly and at scale, and what helps us be able to build the housing that we need for our region, because I'm also thinking about what is this community going to look like for our future generations. So always thinking about doing everything that we can to get obstacles out of their way so they can do what they need to do for their families.
Thank you for your leadership, and thanks for offering such critical thought on how to approach the communities and approach not only the cleanup, but of course the rebuild.
And thank you for everything that you're doing. I know your partnership really means the world to us. We really appreciate you.
Rebuilding LA is hosted by and reported on by me, Kate Cagle. Our senior producer and showrunner is Megan Larson. Our associate producers are Jordan Patterson and Megan Botel. Our video director is Julia McCabe. Our director of post-production is Patrick Stewart. And our senior sound recording engineer is Nick Norton, with audio engineering help from David Iskandarian and motion graphics by Dougal Henkin. Our video editors are Peter Grayson and Daniel Flesher. Ben Church is our senior coordinating producer, and Anne-Marie Hauser is our production manager. Our podcast marketing manager is Bryn Jura, and our product marketing director is Becca Dorman. Our general counsel at the LA Times is Jeff Glasser. Special thanks to President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argenteri, and the Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. Rebuilding LA is co-created by LA Times Studios President Anna Migzanian and executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson. And one final thank you to all the residents of Altadena and the Pacific Palisades for sharing your stories with us.